Alex Vraciu, a Navy fighter pilot, joined forces with Filipino guerrillas both in the skies and on the ground to battle Japanese forces. On June 23, 1944, Lieutenant Junior Grade Alex posed for a photograph with Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, who led Task Force 58, aboard the aircraft carrier Lexington. The pair stood on the starboard wing of Alex's Hellcat fighter plane. Mitcher, known for his small build, wore his signature khaki uniform and his trademark lobsterman's hat. Alex, in his flight gear, stood proudly beside him. Just beneath the cockpit canopy were 19 rising sun emblems, symbols of Alex's confirmed aerial kills, putting him just one short of earning quadruple A status. At only 25 years old, Alex was clearly the Navy's top fighter ace. A few days before, on June 19th, Alex had flown his Grumman F-6F Hellcat as part of Fighting Squadron 16 from the Lexington. During a single mission, he shot down 6 Japanese planes in just 8 minutes, using only 360 rounds of .50 caliber ammo. Upon landing back on the carrier, he beamed with pride and held up 6 fingers in a photo that became legendary during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. In what came to be known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, U.S. Navy aviators and gunners downed over 300 Japanese planes while losing just about 30 of their own. Although Alex had a strong lead among Navy aces, other determined pilots were quickly climbing the ranks. One such pilot was 34-year-old Commander David McCampbell, nicknamed Dashing Dave, who flew with VF-15 aboard the USS Essex. On June 19th, he started the day with 2 confirmed victories, and by sundown had increased his total to 9. Not long after, Alex's winning streak was interrupted. Days after the photo with Mitcher, Alex and the rest of his squadron were sent back to Pearl Harbor aboard the carrier Enterprise. From there, they traveled to San Diego for a 30-day leave. The Navy had several ideas to spotlight its top ace. Recently promoted to full lieutenant, Alex was offered the opportunity to fly a captured Japanese Mitsubishi Zero on a national tour. Another idea involved teaming him up with Lieutenant Cook Cleland, a dive bomber pilot from Bombing Squadron 16, for a war bond campaign. Each would fly the aircraft they had used in combat. While the proposals were exciting, Alex's main focus was getting back to the front lines. With the boldness typical of fighter pilots, he later said, "I don't want to talk to a bunch of draft dodgers." During his break, Alex didn't waste time. On August 6th, his hometown of East Chicago, Indiana, honored him with a parade and a stadium ceremony. More personally significant was his reunion with Catherine Horn, a girl he'd known growing up. During his time away, through college, flight training, and war, she had matured into a stunning woman. Their whirlwind romance led to a honeymoon in New York, but even that wasn't enough to keep Alex from wanting to return to combat. He was temporarily stationed in Jacksonville, Florida, where a helpful admiral pulled some strings to get him reassigned to the fleet. The demand for skilled fighter pilots was growing urgent. Japan's use of kamikaze tactics was escalating, and with their navy mostly destroyed, the U.S. focused more on fighter squadrons and less on bombers. Alex felt even more pressure to get back in the air. By now, he had lost his spot as the Navy's top ace. On October 21st, McCampbell overtook him with his 20th kill, and just 3 days later, McCampbell shot down 9 more in one mission. Alex was initially assigned to VF-9, which had replaced VF-16 earlier. But when he arrived at the forward base on Ulithi, he found out that a kamikaze attack on November 5th had taken the Lexington out of service, and VF-19 was heading home. Determined not to sit on the sidelines, Alex got a second lucky break. Lexington's commanding officer, Ernest Litch, arranged for him to join VF-20 aboard the Enterprise. At last, Alex was back in the fight. On December 14, 1944, he flew his first combat missions in over 5 months. The targets were around Clark Field, part of a campaign to weaken Japanese air forces before the planned invasion of Mindoro. His morning mission mostly involved strafing ground targets. Few enemy aircraft were in the air. He destroyed a parked Nakajima Ki 44 Tojo at Angeles Field, though it didn't count as an air victory. Later that morning, he flew again, destroying a grounded Mitsubishi G4M Betty and 2 more Tojos. But disaster struck. After finishing a final strafing run at Tala Field, Alex's Hellcat was hit. Oil sprayed from a hole above the tank and into the cockpit as the pressure dropped. He climbed to about 900 feet and followed earlier advice from an intelligence officer. Head west toward Mount Pinatubo and away from the lowlands where Japanese forces were dense. He trimmed the plane and opened the canopy, tossing out anything he didn't want to carry with him to the ground. Then, climbing out onto the wing, he clung to the aircraft for a moment that felt endless. When he felt the plane starting to stall at around 400 feet, he let go, arms raised, hoping to avoid hitting the stabilizer. The impact was rough. He hadn't had time to properly adjust for a safe landing, and the wind carried him hard into the ground. Dazed but resolute, he quickly decided he wouldn't be taken prisoner. Drawing his .45 pistol, he prepared for a fight. He saw figures running toward him and assumed they were enemy troops, until they began yelling, "Filipino! Filipino! Don't shoot!" Thankfully, Alex didn't fire. The local guerrillas helped him quickly. They stripped him out of his oil-soaked gear, gave him a straw hat, and handed him a shirt and pants. Though they were so tight, he could only button the bottom two. Their leader, a young man named Lis Ramos, urged him to move fast as Japanese forces were closing in. With a pistol, knife, canteen, anti-malaria tablets, and some emergency money, Alex began a new chapter, as an ace pilot living among Filipino guerrillas. He kept a day-by-day journal of this extraordinary experience, which he later shared with the writer of this account. When Japan first took control of the Philippines early in the war, they tried hard to win the population's support for their vision of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. When that failed, they turned to brutal crackdowns, arrests, and violent punishments. Still, executions were used to suppress growing resistance. Yet the roughly 7,000 islands of the Philippines, stretching over 1,000 miles of ocean, made it unfeasible for the Japanese to garrison and control anything beyond major towns. With the Philippine constabulary no longer active, groups of bandits began raiding rural areas, stealing from vulnerable farmers and demanding tributes. In response, local vigilante units emerged to defend their communities. These groups eventually merged with escaped American and Filipino soldiers, becoming the foundation of a much larger resistance effort. It wasn't until early 1943 that covert support from General Douglas MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Area Command began aiding and coordinating major guerrilla forces. Undercover missions by both American and Filipino operatives helped categorize 4 types of resistance units. Those based around U.S. and Filipino Army veterans, those formed to fight banditry, groups connected to political movements, and a few bands of wandering criminals. For much of the war, Luzon, with its dense concentration of Japanese forces, infrastructure, and counterintelligence, remained out of reach. It wasn't until mid-1944 that MacArthur's agents made contact with American-led guerrillas in southern and central Luzon. By September, submarines had successfully delivered radios and other supplies. Alex Vraciu had parachuted into a region in disarray, an area not clearly controlled by either of the 2 main guerrilla forces on Luzon, which were led by U.S. Army Majors Bernard Anderson in the east and Robert Laughlin in the central sector. According to El Ramos, Alex had landed on the Ramos family's property within the South Tarlac Military District and near the Japanese-occupied town of Capas in Tarlac Province. Hoping to meet Captain Alfred Bruce, a former U.S. Army MP turned guerrilla leader, Alex's rescuers began an 18-kilometer trek, only to retrace part of it after learning Bruce had moved further into the hills to avoid a Japanese raid. That same day, Filipino guerrilla major Alberto Stockton joined them and told Alex about burying the remains of fellow VF-20 squadron member Lieutenant J.D.N. Baker, who had also been downed by enemy fire. By noon on December 16th, they finally reached Bruce's new location. There, Alex met another Navy pilot, Lieutenant F. Vraciu, a TBF Avenger flyer from Hornet's Torpedo Squadron 11 who had been shot down on November 6th. They were now deep in Negrito territory, a mountainous region home to indigenous tribes Alex came to know as belugas. Bruce's camp offered some rare comforts: the chance to wash, eat well on chicken, duck, wild pork, rice, corn, and bananas, and access to scraps of paper and books for keeping a diary. Alex handed over his money kit to Bruce and, along with the rest of the group and their beluga allies, settled in to wait for the anticipated American landing on Luzon. Records suggest Bruce's unit reported up to a U.S. Army lieutenant colonel named Wright through his second-in-command, another lieutenant colonel named P.D. Sears. Bruce's camp was well organized but poorly armed, with hardly any ammunition. Under constant threat from Japanese forces, they could do little more than hide and survive. Messages eventually confirmed that Mindoro had been invaded. Bruce believed an American landing at Lingayen Gulf was imminent. Alex learned Bruce, a heavily bearded man with a love for gin, had narrowly escaped Japanese capture more than once. He once witnessed another American, a tanker named Lieutenant John Hart, take his own life rather than be caught. Alex also found out that the Japanese had put a price on his head. Reports came in that innocent villagers in Capas were being executed as the enemy searched for the downed American pilot. Under these grim conditions, Bruce planned to remain in hiding unless Japanese forces got too close. Apart from a bombing raid by a squadron of B-24 Liberators on December 22nd, there were few signs of an impending invasion. Although he spent Christmas Eve damp and with limited medical supplies, Alex remained in good spirits and health. He received gifts, 2 new shirts and 2 pairs of pants that barely fit, and a far more exciting treat: a front-row view of a 45-minute dogfight between US P-38 Lightnings and Japanese Jack fighters. 1 American and 5 Japanese planes were downed in the skirmish. Watching from the ground, Alex felt a mix of excitement, envy, and frustration. On December 26th, he noted in his diary that clouds had hidden the day's air battles, to his irritation, and wrote scornfully about the easily defeated Japanese Wild Eagles and their ineffective anti-aircraft defenses. In the days that followed, Alex took 4 hopeful shots with his .45 pistol at formations of Japanese Sally bombers flying overhead. He joked in his diary about needing a gun sight, a mil-dot reticle, and 6.50 caliber machine guns. He had always wanted to see a sky full of enemy aircraft, but not quite like this. After those futile attempts, he decided to save his remaining ammo. Alex's pride as a fighter pilot was also evident in his biased observations of American air missions. On January 4, 1945, he was frustrated to see Army P-38s fly directly over a group of Japanese planes without engaging. On January 6th and 7th, despite bad weather, air raids intensified. On the morning of the 7th, Alex witnessed something bizarre: more than 100 Army A-26 Invader bombers flying low across the valley, presumably heading toward Clark Field. Later that day, 24 Hellcats bombed and strafed Japanese airfields. The sky thundered with explosions, machine gun fire, and what Alex assumed was naval artillery booming in the northwest. The shelling resumed at dawn the next day. Bruce now believed the invasion would occur on the night of January 9th. Alex and Graspa were soon joined by a 3rd downed Navy pilot, Lieutenant J.G. Allen Stover of Night Fighter Squadron VFN-19, another casualty from the carrier operations. As shelling began at midnight and carried into the morning, Bruce decided to send a detachment of guerrillas to make contact with the landing Americans. Their goals were to provide intelligence, such as maps, and to secure weapons and ammunition. Since Alex was the only American healthy enough to travel, he was selected to go along as Bruce's representative. Energized and focused, Alex scarcely considered the danger ahead. The group moved north, hugging the foothills west of the valley and carefully avoiding open roads. They advanced in stages, gathering more fighters as they went. That night, they camped at one of Major Stockton's outposts, swelling their number to 75. The next morning, they passed just a few kilometers from Camp O'Donnell, once the final stop of the Bataan Death March, where thousands of American and Filipino prisoners had been held in horrific conditions. By the time they reached a guerrilla base in the Tarlac region run by Alicio Fep Maleri, Alex encountered 4 more rescued American airmen, including Lieutenant J.G. James W. Robinson, a fellow VF-20 squadron member who had also been shot down on December 14th. This part of the trip took them into territory controlled by American guerrilla Albert S. Hendrickson, an Army private who had been given the temporary rank of captain. Alex was about to discover how local guerrilla factions, like Hendrickson's, fiercely protected their territories and held on to grudges. The tension peaked in Manantalk on January 13th. While Alex's group rested in the town square, he was meeting with the town's mayor, police chief, a local guerrilla major named Desson, and the American wife of a local villager. They were headed to lunch when they were suddenly confronted by an armed and scowling guerrilla, wearing a tilted Japanese pilot helmet and holding a rifle partly aimed at Alex. "You Huck?" the man demanded. Huck was short for Hukbalahap, a communist-influenced anti-Japanese group mainly made up of farmers from central Luzon. Though part of the anti-Japanese resistance, they had a reputation for being extreme and terrorizing beyond their main mission. Alex instinctively reached for his pistol, but quickly realized the man was more confused than aggressive. "I'm an American. What is this?" he asked, getting no answer. Instead, sensing the man's hesitation, Alex said, "All right, take me to your leader." The group began following him toward the plaza when one of Alex's guerrillas suddenly ran forward and was instantly cut down by a hail of carbine fire. The man was nearly torn apart and died within seconds. As bullets flew and panic set in, Alex, both shocked and furious, rushed forward shouting for the shooting to stop. Reports later written by Maleri and Stockton confirm Alex's intervention may have prevented a larger massacre. Even so, one of Bruce's men was dead, another wounded, and about a quarter of their group had fled. The shooters were part of Hendrickson's North Tarlac forces under a Filipino officer named Clito. What followed was more of a shouting match than a proper discussion. Clito called Bruce a lazy thief hiding in the hills and insisted Hendrickson had authority over all of Tarlac province. His men, better armed, gained the upper hand. All of Bruce's fighters, except Alex and Stockton, were disarmed and confined in various homes across Manantalk. They were later released and allowed to return to Bruce's camp. Alex's journey took a strange turn as he was placed on a small horse that kept trying to bite his leg. Clito's troops left Manantalk just after midnight on January 15th, marching all night through areas occupied by Japanese forces until reaching Hendrickson's base near Jonah by mid-morning. There, Alex finally met the elusive commander of the South Tarlac forces, and the impression wasn't good. Hendrickson was clearly intoxicated, loud, and unpredictable, giving orders under the influence and terrorizing locals for food and alcohol. He ruled erratically and seemed to think MacArthur's forces would report to him. On January 16th, a warning came in. A large Japanese unit was approaching a nearby river crossing. Armed with a carbine and 75 rounds, Alex joined the long, tense night of watch duty. Lying on the riverbank, he reflected bitterly on his unlikely situation. A fighter pilot now crawling through the jungle, waiting for the enemy. By morning, word arrived that American soldiers were moving into the nearby town of Panique. Finally motivated to act, Hendrickson planned a dramatic display. That afternoon, his group headed north toward Panique, with Hendrickson and Alex on horseback at the front. Behind them marched guerrillas with waving flags and a bugler blasting a loud tune. The spectacle attracted a trail of villagers, children, and animals. Just outside Panique, they encountered their first American soldier, a confused checkpoint guard from the 129th Division out of Illinois, who let them pass. Eventually, the procession reached the division's main group, and Alex was at last back with American forces. A brigadier general personally interviewed him, and over the next few days, Alex was debriefed multiple times. Soon after, he boarded the amphibious command ship Wasatch off Lingayen Gulf. There, he met a foreign correspondent who had been aboard the Lexington during a past campaign. Despite Alex's rugged look, the reporter recognized him and promised to get news of his safety to Catherine in exchange for an exclusive story. Eventually, Alex reached Ulithi and returned to the Lexington, bringing back a Japanese officer's sword, a pistol, and first-hand tales of life with the resistance. He was instantly treated like a hero on board. During the ship's voyage back to Pearl Harbor, Alex, enjoying the fame, refused to shave his signature beard, much to the frustration of the ship's executive officer. He also clung to his desire to stay in the Pacific, managing to get reassigned to another squadron in hopes of flying in upcoming carrier strikes on Japan. But higher-ups decided it was too risky. With his knowledge of resistance movements and enemy positions, Alex was considered too valuable to risk falling into Japanese hands again. His days as a combat pilot were over. His confirmed aerial victories stood at 19. Alex Vraciu finished the war at the U.S. Navy's fourth-ranking fighter ace. The top Navy ace was David McCampbell, a Medal of Honor recipient who finished with 34 confirmed kills, many in the war's final months. While Alex received the Navy Cross and was nominated for the Medal of Honor, he has yet to be awarded it. This story holds special meaning to me because Alex Vraciu is my first cousin and a personal hero. I thoroughly enjoyed reading this fascinating account. Thanks for sharing it. On a related note, Alan Smokey Stover flew with VF-81 from the USS Wasp. He was shot down on January 6, 1945, over Clark Field, but rejoined his unit on February 8th at Ulithi. It makes you wonder, did he and Alex travel together? For 2 years, I lived just south of Tarlac in Pampanga. Even today, the area is known for its unpredictable nature. Alex was lucky to make it out in one piece.